The blood-curdling scream echoed through the streets of Riverside, California, on that fateful summer day in 1876, sending shivers down the spines of every man, woman, and child within earshot. Naomi Garrett stood frozen in the middle of the dusty road, her trembling hands clutching a crumpled telegram that had shattered her world moments before. "No," she whispered, her knees buckling beneath her as the reality of what she'd just read sank in. "Not my boy, not my William." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Naomi collapsed into the dirt, her navy blue dress billowing around her like dark waves. Tears streamed down her face, carving glistening paths through the fine layer of dust that had settled on her cheeks. Owen Jenkins had been leading his horse to the blacksmith when he heard the scream. Something in that sound, raw pain and disbelief, made his blood run cold. He'd heard screams before, plenty of them in his 32 years, but this one was different. This wasn't fear, it was the sound of a heart breaking. He tied his horse, a sturdy palomino named Sundance, to the nearest post and rushed toward the commotion. A small crowd had already gathered around the woman, but no one seemed willing to approach her. They simply stood and stared, unsure of what to do with such naked grief. "Madam," Owen said softly, kneeling beside her. His spurs jingled as he moved, and he winced at how inappropriate the cheerful sound seemed. "Madam, can I help you up?" Naomi didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes, green as spring grass, were unfocused, staring at something beyond the dusty street and the curious onlookers. Owen gently took the telegram from her hands and read it. His jaw tightened as he scanned the words. "William Garrett, age 21, hanged for robbery and murder in Silver Creek, Arizona Territory. Justice served." "He didn't do it," Naomi whispered, her voice hoarse. She finally looked at Owen, truly seeing him for the first time. "My William wouldn't hurt a soul. He couldn't. They've killed the wrong man." Owen had heard such claims before every mother believed in her son's innocence, but something in her certainty gave him pause. He'd been a lawman once, before trading his badge for a life on the move. He'd seen enough justice and injustice to know that mistakes were made, and sometimes those mistakes cost lives. "Let's get you home, Mrs. Garrett," he said gently. "You shouldn't be out here like this." "Naomi," she corrected automatically. "I'm Naomi." Owen helped her to her feet, his strong hands steady under her elbows. "I'm Owen. Owen Jenkins." The crowd parted as Owen guided the shell-shocked woman down the street. He didn't know where she lived, but she moved as if on instinct, her feet carrying her home while her mind remained far away. Riverside had grown considerably since the railroad had come through 4 years earlier, but it still retained the feel of a small town where everyone knew each other's business. As they walked, Owen could hear the whispers starting already. "That's William Garrett's mother. They hanged him in Arizona. Killed a man during a stagecoach robbery, I heard. Always was a wild one." Owen shot a hard glance at the gossipers, silencing them temporarily. He didn't know this woman or her son, but he'd seen enough to know that hearsay could destroy a person's reputation faster than any bullet. Naomi led them to a modest house at the edge of town. It was well kept, with a small garden out front where wildflowers bloomed defiantly against the harsh California summer. A wooden sign hung from the porch, "Garrett's Millinery and Dress Shop." Inside, the front room had been converted into a shop, with hats displayed on wooden stands and bolts of fabric lining the walls. Through a doorway, Owen could see a living area with simple but comfortable furnishings. He helped Naomi to a chair and awkwardly stood by, unsure if he should leave or stay. Something about this woman's grief held him in place. Perhaps it was because he recognized the look in her eyes, the same hollow emptiness he'd seen in his own reflection after losing his family to typhoid 7 years ago. "Would you like some water?" he asked, spotting a pitcher on a side table. Naomi nodded mutely, and Owen poured her a glass. As she sipped, some color returned to her cheeks, though her eyes remained distant. "He was supposed to be in San Francisco," she said suddenly. "Working on the docks. He wrote me last month. How could he be in Arizona?" Owen sat down across from her, removing his hat and placing it on his knee. "I don't know, Madam Naomi, but sometimes young men don't tell their mothers everything." She shook her head vehemently. "No, William tells me everything. He always has. And he's not a thief or a murderer. Someone made a terrible mistake." The conviction in her voice gave Owen pause. He'd met plenty of criminals' mothers who swore their boys were angels, but there was something different about Naomi Garrett. A steadiness beneath her grief that spoke of certainty, not denial. "The telegram," he said gently. "It's official." "From the sheriff in Silver Creek," she confirmed, her voice breaking. "They didn't even wait. They hanged him yesterday. My boy is gone, and I couldn't even say goodbye." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, and Owen felt a tightness in his chest. He was a drifter, just passing through Riverside on his way to somewhere else he'd long ago stopped believing any place could be home. He had no business getting involved in this woman's tragedy, and yet, "I'm heading east," he heard himself say. "I could stop in Silver Creek, ask some questions." Naomi looked up sharply. "You would do that? Why?" It was a fair question, and one Owen wasn't sure he could answer. Maybe it was the way grief had aged her face while somehow making her look vulnerable, like a child. Maybe it was because he recognized the look of someone whose world had just collapsed. Or maybe it was simply that he'd seen enough injustice in his life to be bothered by the possibility of one more. "Because no one should be hanged for something they didn't do," he finally said. "And if your son is innocent, someone needs to find the truth." "I have money," Naomi said quickly, wiping her tears. "I can pay you." Owen shook his head. "I'm not asking for payment, but I need to know everything about your son, when you last heard from him, what he was like, who his friends were, anything that might help." For the first time since receiving the telegram, a flicker of hope appeared in Naomi's eyes. She straightened in her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap as if to contain that fragile emotion. "William was 21, she began, stumbling over the tense. "His father died when he was 14, and he's been the man of the house ever since. He worked odd jobs here in town until last year when he decided to seek his fortune in San Francisco." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke about her son. "He's smart, taught himself to read when he was just 5, and kind. He wouldn't hurt anyone." As Naomi spoke, Owen realized two things. First, that she truly believed in her son's innocence with every fiber of her being. And second, that he was about to get involved in something that could be far more complicated than he'd anticipated. The sun was setting when Naomi finally finished telling Owen everything she knew about William. The young man sounded decent enough, hardworking, responsible, perhaps a bit restless like many young men his age. Nothing in his history suggested the kind of violence described in the telegram. "I should go," Owen said, rising to his feet. "If I leave at first light, I can reach Silver Creek in about a week." Naomi stood as well, her earlier shock now replaced with determination. "I'm coming with you." Owen blinked in surprise. "That's not a good idea. The journey is rough, and Silver Creek is a mining town. It's no place for a lady." "I'm not a lady. I'm a mother," Naomi replied firmly. "And I won't sit here wondering what happened to my son. I need to see for myself. I need to bring him home for a proper burial at the very least." Owen opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. The steel in her voice told him it would be futile. Besides, she had every right to seek answers and to lay her son to rest. "It won't be comfortable," he warned instead. "We'll be camping most nights." "I've lived in California since '53, she said with a hint of pride. "I crossed the plains in a wagon when I was 18. I can handle discomfort." Owen nodded, reassessing the woman before him. She was in her early 40s, he guessed, with strands of silver threading through her dark hair. Life had clearly not been easy for her, but it had made her strong. "We leave at dawn," he said. "Pack light, one bag only, and wear something practical. That dress won't do for riding." Naomi glanced down at her navy blue dress with its modest bustle. "I have something suitable," she assured him. "And Mr. Jenkins, thank you." Owen settled his hat back on his head, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Don't thank me yet, I haven't done anything." "You stopped when everyone else just stared," she said softly. "That's something." He nodded awkwardly and headed for the door. "Dawn," he reminded her, and stepped out into the gathering dusk. As he walked back to the livery where he'd left his horse and his few possessions, Owen wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd planned to stay in Riverside only long enough to rest Sundance and replenish his supplies before moving on. Now he was committed to a journey with a grieving mother who was convinced her hanged son was innocent. It wasn't his problem. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's troubles only led to pain. After losing his wife and daughter, he'd vowed never to let anyone get close enough to hurt him again. For 7 years, he'd kept that promise, drifting from town to town, taking odd jobs and moving on before he could form attachments. Yet something about Naomi Garrett's quiet determination had breached his carefully constructed walls. Perhaps it was simply that helping her gave him a purpose, something he'd been lacking for too long. Or perhaps it was those green eyes, filled with grief but refusing to surrender to it. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Owen made his way to the small room he'd rented above the livery. He'd need rest for the journey ahead, and for whatever awaited them in Silver Creek. Dawn painted the eastern sky with streaks of gold and pink as Owen led Sundance to Naomi's house. He'd purchased a sturdy mare for her from the livery stable, a gentle bay named Pepper, that the stableman assured him was suitable for a lady rider. He was surprised to find Naomi already waiting on her porch, dressed in a split riding skirt and a plain blouse. Her hair was braided and pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat, and a small leather satchel sat at her feet. There was no sign of the broken woman from yesterday. In her place stood someone determined and ready to face whatever lay ahead. "You've ridden before?" Owen asked by way of greeting. "Yes." "Not recently, but I remember how." She eyed Pepper with approval. "She looks gentle. According to the stableman, she is. We'll take it slow until you're comfortable." Naomi nodded and picked up her satchel. "I'm ready." They set out as the sun cleared the horizon, heading east out of Riverside. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day in the California summer. They rode in silence for the first hour, each lost in their own thoughts. "Did you have family here?" Naomi eventually asked. "In Riverside," Owen shook his head, "just passing through." "You're giving up your plans to help a stranger find the truth about her son," she observed. "That's unusually kind." He shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "I don't have urgent plans, and I've been to Silver Creek before. It's not much of a detour." That wasn't entirely true. Silver Creek was definitely out of his way, but Owen didn't want to examine his motives too closely. He told himself it was simply the right thing to do, and that was enough. "Still, I'm grateful," Naomi said. "I couldn't do this alone." The sincere gratitude in her voice made Owen even more uncomfortable. "Tell me more about your son," he said, changing the subject. "You said he was working in San Francisco." "That's what his letters said," Naomi confirmed. He was loading cargo at the docks. The pay was good and he was saving to buy land someday. Her voice caught. He always wanted his own ranch, just a small one, but his. And the last letter, when was it? 3 weeks ago. He sounded happy. Said he'd met some interesting people and might have a better opportunity soon, but he didn't give details. She frowned. I suppose that could have meant he was planning to go to Arizona, but why wouldn't he tell me? Young men often think they're protecting their mothers by keeping things from them, Owen said. Especially if they're doing something they're not sure you'd approve of. Naomi's expression hardened. William wouldn't rob a stagecoach or kill anyone. That's not protection. That's a completely different person from my son. Owen nodded, not wanting to argue. Parents often didn't know their children as well as they thought they did, but pointing that out wouldn't help. Instead, he guided the conversation to practical matters. We'll stop in San Bernardino to resupply, he said. From there, we'll follow the trail to Yuma, then cross into the Arizona territory. It'll take about a week if the weather holds and we don't run into trouble. What kind of trouble? Naomi asked. Owen hesitated. The usual kind. Bandits. Bad weather. Broken equipment. He didn't mention Apache raiding parties or the other dangers that could befall travelers in the territories. She looked worried enough already. They rode steadily through the day, stopping only to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. By nightfall, they'd covered a good distance, and Owen found a suitable camping spot near a small stream. We'll rest here, he announced, dismounting and helping Naomi down from her mare. She moved stiffly, clearly sore from the day's ride, but she didn't complain. Owen efficiently set up camp, building a small fire and laying out bedrolls on opposite sides of it. He could feel Naomi watching him as he worked, and it made him self-conscious in a way he hadn't felt in years. You've done this before, she observed as he prepared a simple stew from provisions he carried. Many times, he confirmed, not elaborating. What did you do before you became a drifter, Mr. Jenkins? The question was direct, but her tone was simply curious, not judgmental. Still, Owen tensed. He didn't discuss his past, not with anyone. I wore a badge for a while, he said after a moment, his voice neutral. Didn't suit me. And before that, he stirred the stew with more force than necessary. Does it matter? Naomi was quiet for a moment. I suppose not. But if we're traveling together for a week, it might be nice to know something about each other. Owen sighed. She had a point. I was a rancher in Texas, had a small spread near El Paso. What happened to it? Lost it. He didn't volunteer that he'd lost it after his wife and daughter died, when he'd stopped caring about anything, including the ranch that had been his life's dream. Your turn. Have you always been in Riverside? Naomi seemed to sense his reluctance to discuss his past further and accepted the change of subject gracefully. No, my husband and I came west in '53 during the gold rush. Thomas was convinced he'd strike it rich. She smiled faintly at the memory. We never found gold, but Riverside was growing and Thomas was good with his hands. He built our house and helped with others. I started sewing and making hats to bring in extra money. After he died, I turned the front room into a proper shop. And your son, he didn't want to build. William was more of a dreamer than his father. He wanted adventure before settling down. That's why San Francisco appealed to him. Her voice caught. I never imagined his adventure would end like this. The raw pain in her voice silenced Owen. He served the stew in tin bowls and handed one to her, along with a spoon. They ate quietly, the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a coyote the only sounds in the deepening night. After they'd eaten, Owen cleaned the bowls in the stream and stoked the fire for the night. Naomi had already settled onto her bedroll, her back to him. We should reach San Bernardino tomorrow evening, he said. You can have a proper bed at the hotel there if you'd like. Thank you, she replied, her voice muffled. Good night, Mr. Jenkins. Owen, he corrected. If we're traveling together, you might as well use my given name. She rolled over slightly to look at him across the fire. The flames cast flickering shadows across her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. Good night, Owen. Good night, Naomi. As he settled onto his own bedroll, Owen found himself thinking about William Garrett. If the young man truly had been in San Francisco 3 weeks ago, how had he ended up hanging for a crime in Arizona? The distance was considerable, and stagecoach robberies were usually carried out by local gangs who knew the territory. Something didn't add up, and Owen's old instincts as a lawman were awakening after years of dormancy. If there had been a case of mistaken identity, as Naomi believed, then someone innocent had died. And if that was true, the real killer was still out there. With those troubling thoughts circling in his mind, Owen drifted into an uneasy sleep, his hand never far from the revolver that lay beside his bedroll. The journey to San Bernardino passed without incident, though Naomi was clearly suffering from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. By the time they reached the growing town, her face was drawn with exhaustion, but she hadn't uttered a single complaint. Owen secured rooms for them at a decent hotel, separate rooms, of course, and arranged for a hot bath to be sent up for Naomi. He could see the relief in her eyes at the prospect of washing away the dust of the trail. We'll resupply in the morning and head out by noon, he told her as they stood in the hotel lobby. Get some rest. Thank you, Owen, she said softly, for everything. He nodded uncomfortably and watched her ascend the stairs to her room before heading out to check on the horses and find himself a drink. The day's ride had given him too much time to think, and memories he'd long suppressed were beginning to surface. He needed whiskey to quiet them. The saloon across from the hotel was typical of its kind, noisy, smoky, and filled with men looking to forget their troubles for a while. Owen found a quiet corner table and ordered a bottle. He didn't plan to get drunk, he never did anymore, but he needed enough to dull the sharp edges of his thoughts. He was on his second glass when a shadow fell across his table. Looking up, he found himself facing a man in a marshal's badge. Jenkins. Owen Jenkins. Owen tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun before he caught himself. Who's asking? The marshal, a weathered man in his 50s, smiled thinly. Thought that was you. It's Dawson. We worked that rustling case near Abilene back in '68. Recognition dawned and Owen relaxed slightly. Marshal Dawson, been a while. 7 years, give or take. Dawson pulled out a chair and sat without waiting for an invitation. Heard you threw away your badge after what happened in Lerdo. Owen's jaw tightened. That what they're saying, among other things. Dawson signaled to the bartender for another glass. Never believed half of it myself. You were a good lawman. Until I wasn't. Owen poured a measure of whiskey into the glass that was brought over. What brings you to San Bernardino, escorting a prisoner to Los Angeles, Dawson explained. Stopover for the night. He studied Owen over the rim of his glass. And you, last I heard you were drifting, no fixed address, still am. Dawson nodded thoughtfully. Saw you ride in with a lady, didn't figure you for the marrying type, not anymore. I'm not, Owen said sharply. She's a client, nothing more. Her son was hanged in Silver Creek last week. She thinks it was a mistake. Interest flickered in Dawson's eyes. Silver Creek. That would be Sheriff Hollister's jurisdiction. Mean son of a gun, but efficient. You know him, by reputation only. He cleaned up Silver Creek when the Silver Strike brought in all kinds of trouble. Doesn't tolerate lawlessness. Dawson sipped his whiskey. If he hanged her son, the boy probably had it coming. Owen's grip tightened on his glass. Maybe, maybe not. That's what we're going to find out. Dawson raised an eyebrow. We? Since when do you care about other people's problems, Jenkins? Thought you were done with all that. The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Owen had asked himself the same thing more than once over the past 2 days. Just doing a job, he muttered. Right. Dawson didn't sound convinced. Well, if you're heading to Silver Creek, watch yourself. The Apache have been restless lately. Army's been having trouble keeping them on the reservation. Thanks for the warning. Owen drained his glass and stood, suddenly eager to end the conversation. Dawson knew too much about his past, and the marshal's knowing look suggested he saw more than Owen wanted him to see. Give my regards to Los Angeles. Jenkins, Dawson called as Owen reached the door. Whatever happened in Laredo, it wasn't your fault. Anyone who knows you knows that. Owen didn't respond. He stepped out into the cool night air, Dawson's words echoing in his mind. If only it were that simple. If only he could believe it himself. He returned to the hotel and paused outside Naomi's door. Light shone from beneath it, suggesting she was still awake. For a moment, he considered knocking, telling her what Dawson had said about Sheriff Hollister. But what good would that do? It would only add to her worries. Instead, he continued to his own room. Tomorrow would be another long day on the trail, and they still had most of the journey ahead of them. They left San Bernardino the following day as planned, their saddlebags full of fresh supplies. Naomi seemed refreshed after a night in a proper bed, though Owen noticed she winced slightly as she mounted Pepper. We'll take it slower today, he told her. No need to push too hard. She shot him a grateful look but shook her head. I'll keep up. Every day we delay is another day without answers. They rode east, leaving the relative civilization of San Bernardino behind and entering the harsher landscape that would eventually lead them to the Arizona territory. The terrain grew more rugged, the vegetation sparser, and the heat more intense as they traveled. By the third day out of San Bernardino, they had settled into a routine. They rode from dawn until mid-afternoon, rested during the worst of the heat, then rode for a few more hours before making camp. Owen hunted when he could, supplementing their provisions with fresh meat. Naomi insisted on doing her share of the camp chores, despite his initial protests. As they grew more comfortable with each other, conversation became easier. Owen found himself sharing stories from his days as a lawman, carefully edited to avoid anything too personal. Naomi spoke of Riverside, of her millinery business, and most often of William. He was always finding injured animals and bringing them home, she recalled one evening as they sat beside their campfire. Birds with broken wings, stray dogs, even a fox kit once. Thomas would grumble, but he always built cages or pens for William's menagerie. Owen could hear the love in her voice, see the pride in her eyes as she spoke of her son. It made him all the more determined to discover the truth in Silver Creek. If William Garrett had indeed been innocent, someone needed to know. Someone needed to care. What will you do? He asked quietly. After Silver Creek, I mean. Will you go back to Riverside? Naomi stared into the fire. I don't know. Everything there reminds me of William, but it's home, the only one I have now. She looked up at him. What about you? Where will you go? Owen shrugged. Wherever the wind takes me, I suppose. That's been my way for a long time. Doesn't it get lonely? Never staying in one place, never putting down roots. It's simpler, he said, avoiding the question. No complications. No connections, you mean, Naomi said softly. No one to lose. The insight startled him. He'd never put it quite so bluntly to himself, but she was right. If you didn't care about anyone, you couldn't be hurt when they were taken away. Something like that, he admitted, uncomfortable with her perception. She studied him across the fire, her green eyes reflecting the flames. What happened to you, Owen? Who did you lose? The direct question caught him off guard. For a moment, he considered deflecting it as he always did when anyone got too close to the truth. But something about the quietness of the night, the distance from civilization, and the genuine concern in Naomi's eyes loosened the tight control he kept on his memories. "My wife and daughter," he said, the words feeling rusty from disuse. "Typhoid fever. 7 years ago." Naomi's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry, that's a terrible loss. It was a long time ago." The practiced response came automatically, though the pain felt as fresh as ever. "Time doesn't matter much with that kind of grief," she said. "I lost my husband 8 years ago, and some days it still feels like yesterday." Owen nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. "After they died, I couldn't stay in the house we'd built together. Couldn't run the ranch. I took the badge because it gave me something to focus on besides the emptiness." "And Laredo?" she asked gently. "What happened there?" Owen's head snapped up. "How do you know about Laredo?" "I heard you talking to that marshal in San Bernardino," Naomi admitted. "I was coming down for some air and overheard. I didn't mean to eavesdrop." Owen's jaw tightened. He'd revealed more than he intended already. Laredo was a line he wasn't willing to cross. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. It's not a story for a campfire," he said curtly. "We should get some rest. Long day tomorrow." He could feel her watching him as he abruptly stood and moved away to check on the horses. The walls he'd momentarily lowered were firmly back in place, and he regretted the moment of weakness that had led him to share even as much as he had. Caring about people only led to pain. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, and he wasn't about to forget it. The next morning, Owen was up before dawn, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. He'd slept poorly, haunted by dreams of his wife and daughter, dreams that had become less frequent over the years, but never entirely disappeared. Naomi emerged from her bedroll as the first light appeared in the eastern sky. She looked as if she hadn't slept well either, but she offered him a tentative smile. "I'm sorry about last night," she said quietly as he handed her a cup of coffee. "I shouldn't have pried." Owen shrugged. "No harm done." They broke camp efficiently and continued their journey eastward. The terrain had become increasingly harsh, a stark, beautiful landscape of red rock formations and sparse vegetation. The heat was relentless, but they'd adjusted their pace to account for it. Around midday, Owen noticed dust on the horizon behind them. He pulled Sundance to a halt, squinting against the bright sunlight. "What is it?" Naomi asked, reining in beside him. "Riders," Owen said, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle in his saddle holster. "Could be nothing, could be trouble. Bandits, maybe." He studied the distant dust cloud. 3 riders coming fast. Let's get off the trail." He led her to a cluster of boulders where they could observe the approaching horsemen while remaining partially concealed. As the riders drew nearer, Owen relaxed slightly. They were well-dressed men on good horses, not the typical appearance of bandits who preyed on travelers. "I think they're cattlemen," he told Naomi. "Probably harmless, but let's wait and see." The 3 riders slowed as they approached the spot where Owen and Naomi had left the trail. The lead man, a burly fellow with a thick mustache, pointed to the tracks and they began following them toward the boulders. Owen stepped out, his hand resting casually near his revolver. "Afternoon, gentlemen." The riders pulled up sharply. "Didn't mean to startle you, friend," the leader said. "Saw you leave the trail and thought you might be in trouble." "Appreciated, but we're fine," Owen replied. "Just taking a break from the heat." The man nodded, his eyes shifting to Naomi as she emerged from behind the rocks. His expression changed subtly, a flicker of recognition that set Owen's nerves on edge. "Madam," the stranger said, touching the brim of his hat. "Traveling far, far enough," Owen answered before Naomi could speak. "And you?" Heading back to our ranch near Yuma, the man said. I'm Frank Carson. These are my brothers, Ed and Pete. The other men nodded in greeting. All three had the weathered look of men who spent their lives outdoors, but there was something in their eyes that Owen didn't trust, a calculating quality that seemed at odds with their friendly manner. Well, we won't keep you, Owen said. The day's wasting, and we've got ground to cover. Carson nodded, but his gaze lingered on Naomi. Wouldn't be heading to Silver Creek by any chance, would you, madam? The question sent a chill down Owen's spine. How could this stranger possibly know their destination? Naomi stiffened beside him. Why do you ask? Carson shrugged. Just curious. Heard there was some excitement there last week. A hanging. We're heading to Yuma, Owen lied smoothly. My sister and I have business there. Sister, is it? Carson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, safe travels. The three men rode off, and Owen watched until they were well out of sight before turning to Naomi. They know who you are, he said grimly, and they know where we're going. But how? We haven't told anyone our plans except in San Bernardino. News travels fast in these parts. Owen frowned, and they seemed too interested in Silver Creek for it to be coincidence. You think they had something to do with William's death? Naomi asked, her voice tight with anxiety. I don't know, Owen admitted, but I don't like it. We need to be more careful from here on out. They altered their route slightly, taking a less direct path to throw off anyone who might be following them. Owen insisted they travel longer into the evening and make cold camps without fires that might give away their position. The precautions slowed their progress, but Owen's instincts told him caution was necessary. 3 days later, they crossed into the Arizona territory. The landscape had become even more rugged, with towering mesas and deep canyons. They were still at least 2 days from Silver Creek, according to Owen's reckoning. That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered arroyo, Naomi broached the subject that had clearly been on her mind since their encounter with the Carson brothers. If William truly was innocent, she said, if it was a case of mistaken identity as I believe, then the real criminals are still out there. Owen nodded. That's likely. And if they know I'm coming to ask questions, they might see you as a threat, Owen finished the thought. Yes, that's occurred to me. What will we do when we reach Silver Creek? She asked. How do we find the truth? Owen had been considering this question himself. First, we talked to Sheriff Hollister, find out exactly what evidence they had against William. Then we talked to witnesses, anyone who saw the stagecoach robbery or who saw William in town before the hanging. And if we discover he was innocent, what then? Then we find out who the real guilty party is, Owen said, his voice hardening, and we make sure justice is served. Naomi's eyes gleamed in the fading light. Thank you, for believing it's possible, at least. Owen hadn't said he believed William was innocent, only that he would help discover the truth. But looking at Naomi's determined face, he realized he wanted her to be right. He wanted her son to have been the victim of a terrible mistake, rather than a criminal who'd met a justified end, and that realization troubled him. He was getting too invested in Naomi Garrett's quest for the truth, too invested in Naomi herself. They reached Silver Creek just before noon on the 10th day of their journey. The mining town was larger than Owen had expected, a bustling settlement nestled in a valley, surrounded by the silver-rich mountains that gave it its name. Main Street was lined with the usual businesses, saloons, hotels, a general store, and at the far end, a solid-looking building with the sheriff's office. Owen felt Naomi tense beside him as they rode into town. Her hands gripped the reins tightly, and her face had gone pale beneath her tan. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She nodded, her throat working. It's just, my son died here, in this place. Owen understood. He'd never been able to return to the small Texas town where he'd buried his family. Some places became forever marked by grief. "We'll start at the hotel," he decided. "Get rooms, clean up, and then visit the sheriff. Better to approach this rested and prepared." Naomi looked as if she wanted to argue but nodded in agreement. The long journey had taken its toll on her, and exhaustion was etched in the lines around her eyes. The Silver Creek Hotel was a surprisingly elegant establishment for a mining town, with an ornate wooden facade and clean, spacious rooms. The desk clerk, a wiry man with spectacles, barely glanced at them as he handed over keys to adjacent rooms on the second floor. "Dining rooms open from 6 to 8, he informed them in a bored voice. "Baths extra, but there's hot water in the pitchers." Once in her room, Naomi sank onto the bed, the weight of their arrival in Silver Creek seeming to hit her all at once. Owen hovered awkwardly in the doorway, unsure whether to leave her alone or offer comfort. "I'll get us something to eat," he said finally. "Rest a bit. We'll see the sheriff afterward." She nodded without looking up. "Thank you." Owen returned half an hour later with sandwiches from the hotel's dining room. Naomi had washed and changed into a fresh dress, a simple, dark blue garment that made her look both dignified and vulnerable. They ate in silence, each lost in thought about the task ahead. When they'd finished, Owen checked his revolver out of habit, then led the way to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hollister was a big man with a neatly trimmed beard and cold, assessing eyes. He looked up from his desk as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Help you folks." Owen stepped forward. "Sheriff, I'm Owen Jenkins. This is Mrs. Naomi Garrett." Recognition flickered in Hollister's eyes at Naomi's name. "Mrs. Garrett, I sent you a telegram about a week ago. Didn't expect to see you in person." "I've come about my son," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the emotion Owen could sense beneath it. "William Garrett." "Madam, I understand you're grieving, but the law was followed. Your son was caught red-handed robbing the Yuma stage. He shot the driver, man died 2 days later. We had 3 witnesses identify him, and he was tried and sentenced according to the law." "There's been a mistake," Naomi insisted. "My son was in San Francisco. He couldn't have been here." Hollister's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained hard. "Mrs. Garrett, I know this is difficult to accept. No mother wants to believe her son could do such things. But the evidence was clear." "What evidence exactly?" Owen asked, stepping in. Hollister's gaze shifted to him. "And you are what to Mrs. Garrett, not her husband, I take it?" "A friend," Owen replied evenly. "I'm helping her find the truth about her son. The truth is he robbed the Yuma stage with 2 accomplices. They got away, he didn't. The passengers and the shotgun guard identified him. We found some of the stolen items in his room at the boarding house. It was an open and shut case." "I'd like to see where he's buried," Naomi said quietly. A flicker of something discomfort crossed Hollister's face. "Boot Hill, north edge of town, plots marked. And his personal effects?" she asked. "Not much," Hollister said. "Whatever he had is in a box in the back. You're welcome to it." While Hollister retrieved the box, Owen studied the wanted posters on the wall, wondering if any might be connected to the stagecoach robbery. One caught his eye, a sketch of a man who looked vaguely familiar, though he couldn't place him. Hollister returned with a small wooden box and handed it to Naomi. "That's everything." She opened it carefully. Inside was a pocket watch, a small leather wallet, and a few other personal items. Naomi lifted the watch, her hands trembling. "This isn't William's," she said, her voice barely audible. "His father's watch had an inscription inside the cover." Hollister frowned. "That's what was on him when we brought him in." Naomi opened the wallet next. It contained a few dollars and a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a letter. She scanned it, her face paling. "This is addressed to someone named James Miller," she said. "Not William Garrett." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Hollister's face. "The man identified himself as William Garrett when we arrested him. That's the name he gave at his trial." "May I see the letter?" Owen asked. Naomi handed it to him. It was a brief note from someone named Sarah, expressing her love for James and her hope that he'd return from Silver Creek with enough money to start their life together. "Sheriff," Owen said slowly, "did you verify the man's identity in any way, beyond taking his word for it?" Hollister's jaw tightened. "We had 3 witnesses identify him as one of the robbers. His identity wasn't in question." "But if he wasn't William Garrett," Naomi pressed, "if he was this James Miller, then my son is still alive somewhere." "And you hanged an innocent man, at least innocent of being William." "Or your son was using an alias," Hollister countered, though with less certainty than before. "Criminals often do." "Do you have a physical description of the man you hanged?" Owen asked. "Height, weight, distinguishing marks." "Of course, it's in the arrest record." Hollister pulled a ledger from his desk and flipped through it. "Here, James Miller, alias William Garrett, 22 years old, 5'10", brown hair, blue eyes, scar on left forearm from an old knife wound." Naomi shook her head vehemently. "William is 21, not 22. He has green eyes like mine, and he never had a knife wound. Never." Hollister stared at her, the implications of what she was saying clearly sinking in. "Mrs. Garrett, are you suggesting we hanged the wrong man entirely?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "You hanged someone who falsely gave my son's name for reasons I don't understand, but it wasn't William." The sheriff ran a hand through his hair, visibly disturbed. "This doesn't make sense." "Why would someone claim to be your son if they weren't?" "That's what we intend to find out," Owen said grimly, "along with who this James Miller really was and why he was using William Garrett's name." Hollister closed the ledger with a snap. "I'll help you in any way I can. If what you're saying is true, a grave injustice has been done to the man we hanged and to your son, whose name has been tarnished." "We'll need to speak with the witnesses," Owen said, "and see any evidence you have from the robbery." "First thing tomorrow," Hollister agreed. "The stage line agent who handled the case is out of town until then." As they left the sheriff's office, Naomi was trembling, but her eyes were bright with a mixture of hope and determination. "William could still be alive," she whispered. "If that man wasn't him, let's not get ahead of ourselves," Owen cautioned, though he shared her sense that they'd uncovered something significant. "We need to find out why someone would use William's name. That's the key to all of this." They walked to Boot Hill in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The cemetery was a dusty, desolate place on a rise overlooking the town. Simple wooden markers identified most graves, though some of the wealthier citizens had proper headstones. They found the freshest grave easily enough. The marker was crude. "William Garrett, hanged for murder and robbery, July 18, 1876. Naomi stared at it for a long moment, then shook her head. "This isn't my son. Whoever lies here, it isn't William." Owen nodded, believing her now more than ever. Something very strange had happened in Silver Creek, a case of stolen identity that had led to a man's death and potentially put William Garrett in danger as well. "We should get back to the hotel," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As they turned to leave, Owen noticed a figure watching them from the edge of the cemetery, a man on horseback, partially obscured by a stand of juniper trees. When he realized he'd been spotted, the rider wheeled his horse around and galloped away. "What is it?" Naomi asked, following his gaze. "Someone's interested in our investigation," Owen said grimly. "Let's go." That evening, they ate dinner in the hotel's dining room, speaking in low voices about what they'd learned. The letter to James Miller from Sarah seemed their best lead, a concrete connection to the man's real identity. "We need to find this Sarah," Owen said. "She might be able to tell us who James Miller really was and why he was using William's name." "But how? We don't have a last name, and Sarah is common." "The letter had no address, but the paper might tell us something. And Miller might have mentioned her to someone in town before his arrest." They were so engrossed in their discussion that they didn't immediately notice the man who approached their table, a slender, well-dressed individual with a neat mustache and intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Garrett." "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Edward Palmer, attorney at law." He offered a business card. "I represented the man known as William Garrett at his trial." Owen tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun, but Naomi gestured for him to relax. "Mr. Palmer, please join us," she said, indicating an empty chair. "We have questions about my son, or rather about the man who claimed to be my son." Palmer sat, his expression troubled. "I suspected something wasn't right during the trial." He seemed confused about certain details of his life. "I attributed it to fear, but now I wonder." "Did he ever mention anyone named Sarah?" Owen asked. Palmer's eyebrows rose. "Yes, several times. He asked if she could visit him in jail, but no woman by that name ever came. I assumed she was avoiding association with a condemned man." "And did he ever admit to the robbery?" "He maintained his innocence throughout," Palmer said. "Claimed he was being framed. But the evidence was overwhelming: witnesses, stolen items found in his possession." The jury deliberated less than an hour. "We believe he may have been a man named James Miller," Naomi said. "Not my son at all," Palmer frowned. "But why would he claim to be William Garrett if he wasn't?" "That's what we need to find out," Owen replied. "Did he say anything about San Francisco? Or about why he came to Silver Creek?" "He mentioned working on the docks in San Francisco," Palmer confirmed. "Said he came to Silver Creek because he heard about opportunities in the silver mines. Nothing unusual in that. Half the men in town came for the same reason." The confirmation that the hanged man had known about William's life in San Francisco was troubling. It suggested a connection between them, perhaps even that William was in danger. "Mr. Palmer," Naomi said, "did you believe he was guilty?" The attorney hesitated. "As his lawyer, I had to presume his innocence. As a man, the evidence was compelling, but there were inconsistencies that bothered me." He seemed genuinely shocked by some of the testimony, particularly about the stolen items found in his room. "As if he didn't know they were there," Owen suggested. "Exactly," Palmer agreed. "But the sheriff found them in plain sight: a gold watch and some jewelry from the stage passengers. It was damning." "Could someone have planted them?" Naomi asked. "It's possible," Palmer admitted. "But who? And why frame him specifically?" It was the question at the heart of the mystery. Why would someone frame James Miller while he was pretending to be William Garrett? Or was Miller himself the one doing the framing, for reasons they had yet to discover? As Palmer took his leave, promising to check his notes from the trial for any other useful information, Owen caught sight of a familiar face at the bar, one of the Carson brothers they'd encountered on the trail. "Don't look now," he murmured to Naomi, "but we're being watched. One of those ranchers we met is at the bar." Naomi kept her gaze fixed on her plate. "What does it mean?" "It means our investigation is making someone nervous." Owen's hand rested near his gun, "and that we're on the right track." Later, in the privacy of Naomi's hotel room, they reviewed what they'd learned. The facts were beginning to form a pattern, but one with significant gaps. James Miller was in San Francisco, Owen reasoned. He met William there, learned about his life, and for some reason decided to steal his identity when he came to Silver Creek. But why? And what happened to William? Naomi's voice quavered slightly. If this man was using his name, where is my son? Owen had been avoiding this question, knowing how painful it might be. There are several possibilities. William might still be in San Francisco, unaware of what's happened. Or someone wanted him out of the way, Naomi finished, her face pale but composed. And using his identity was part of that plan. Owen nodded grimly. Tomorrow, we need to speak with the stagecoach witnesses and learn everything we can about the robbery. That's where all of this started. Naomi moved to the window, gazing out at the darkened street below. I knew William wasn't a murderer, she said softly. But I never imagined anything like this. Who would hate my son enough to steal his name and commit crimes under it? Owen had no answer. But as he bid her good night and returned to his own room, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something far more dangerous than a simple case of mistaken identity. Morning brought a clear sky and fresh determination. Owen and Naomi met Sheriff Hollister at his office, where he introduced them to Silas Mercer, the Wells Fargo agent who had handled the investigation of the stagecoach robbery. Mercer was a precise man with a ledger full of notes about the crime. July 10th, he recited. The stage was carrying 7 passengers and a shipment of payroll for the Silverado mine, about $5,000. 3 men ambushed it at Cottonwood Canyon, about 10 miles east of town. And one of them was identified as William Garrett, or rather, the man calling himself William Garrett, Owen clarified. That's right, Mercer confirmed. The driver, Sam Wilson, was shot during the holdup. He identified Garrett before he died from his wounds. So did 2 of the passengers. How was he caught? Naomi asked. He came into town the next day, Hollister explained. Brazen as you please. One of the passengers spotted him on Main Street and alerted my deputy. That seems careless for a man who just committed murder, Owen observed. Mercer shrugged. Criminals aren't always smart. We found nearly $100 of the stolen money in his possession, along with jewelry taken from the passengers. What about the other 2 robbers? Naomi asked. Never caught them, Hollister admitted. Garrett, or Miller, if that's his real name, refused to identify his accomplices. Said he'd been framed and didn't know anything about any robbery. Owen frowned. Something about the story didn't fit. I'd like to speak with the passengers who identified him. That might be difficult, Mercer said. They were all travelers passing through. But Mrs. Alina Whitfield is still in town. She's staying with her sister while recovering from the ordeal. The other witness, a Mr. Harrison, continued on to Tucson after testifying at the trial. Mrs. Whitfield, then, Owen decided. Where can we find her? With directions to the Whitfield residence, Owen and Naomi left the sheriff's office. As they walked down Main Street, Owen became aware of eyes following them, townsfolk watching with undisguised curiosity. Word has spread about why we're here, he murmured to Naomi. We need to be careful. Do you think we're in danger? She asked quietly. I think someone has gone to a lot of trouble to frame an innocent man while stealing your son's identity. That suggests a plan that's still unfolding, and our questions might be interfering with it. The Whitfield home was a neat, white-painted house at the respectable end of town. They were received by Mrs. Whitfield herself, a middle-aged woman with a perpetually startled expression and nervous hands that fluttered like birds as she spoke. It was the most terrible experience, she told them as they sat in her parlor. I've never been so frightened in all my life. 3 men with bandanas over their faces, waving guns and shouting. One of them shot poor Mr. Wilson when he reached for his shotgun. And you identified one of these men as William Garrett? Owen asked gently. Mrs. Whitfield nodded vigorously. Oh, yes, he was the one who collected our valuables. Made us hand over our money, watches, jewelry, everything. His bandana slipped as he was taking my necklace. I saw his face clearly. What did he look like? Naomi asked, her voice steady despite the pain Owen knew she must be feeling. Young man, brown hair, blue eyes. Quite handsome, actually, which seemed a shame for a criminal. Mrs. Whitfield peered at Naomi. Are you a relative of his? You don't look alike. I'm his mother, Naomi said simply. Or rather, I'm William Garrett's mother. We believe the man who was hanged was using my son's name falsely. Mrs. Whitfield's eyes widened. Oh, but why would he do that? That's what we're trying to determine, Owen explained. Did the man say anything during the robbery that might help us? Anything unusual? Mrs. Whitfield frowned in concentration. He didn't say much, but now that you mention it, there was something odd. When he took my necklace, it was a gift from my late husband. Very sentimental. I begged him to leave it. And he said, "Blame Garrett for this, madam, not me." I thought it strange at the time, him referring to himself by name. Owen and Naomi exchanged a significant look. Blame Garrett, Owen repeated, not blame me. As if he wanted William to be blamed, Naomi said softly. Is there anything else you remember, Mrs. Whitfield? Owen pressed. Anything about the other two robbers? They were bigger men, she recalled. One had a deep voice, he seemed to be giving the orders. The other barely spoke. I couldn't identify either of them. They kept their faces covered the entire time. They thanked Mrs. Whitfield for her time and left, both deep in thought. As they walked back toward the center of town, Naomi broke the silence. Someone wanted to frame William, she said. Not just use his name, but deliberately make him take the blame for a crime. But why? Owen wondered. What could William have done to deserve that kind of revenge? Nothing, Naomi insisted. He's a good man. Always has been. Owen believed her, but experience had taught him that even good men could make enemies. We need to find out more about James Miller, and we need to establish a connection between him and William. They spent the rest of the day interviewing the boarding house keeper, where Miller had stayed, the bartender at the saloon he frequented, and anyone else who had interacted with him during his brief time in Silver Creek. The picture that emerged was of a quiet man who kept to himself, drank moderately, and seemed to have come to town looking for mining work. Nothing suspicious about him at all, the boarding house keeper insisted. Paid his rent on time, didn't cause trouble. I was shocked when they arrested him. By evening, they had circled back to the same puzzling questions. Why had James Miller stolen William Garrett's identity? And where was William now? They returned to the hotel, tired and frustrated by the lack of clear answers. As they entered the lobby, the desk clerk called Owen over. "Telegram for you, Mr. Jenkins," he said, handing over a yellow envelope. Owen frowned. No one knew he was in Silver Creek except Marshal Dawson. He opened the telegram and read it quickly, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Naomi asked anxiously. Owen handed her the telegram. It was brief and unsigned. "Stop asking questions if you want to find William Garrett alive." Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. "William is alive," she whispered, "but someone has him." Owen guided her quickly upstairs, away from curious eyes. In the privacy of her room, he tried to make sense of this new development. "It's a threat," he said grimly, "but it's also confirmation that William is alive and being held somewhere. By the same people who framed James Miller while he was using William's name?" Naomi asked, her voice shaking. "It seems likely." Owen paced the small room. "The question is, do we obey the warning or ignore it?" Naomi's green eyes flashed with determination. "We find my son, whatever it takes." Owen nodded, admiring her courage even as he worried about the danger they were clearly facing. "We need to be smart about this. Whoever sent this telegram is watching us. They know we're asking questions. The Carson brothers, Naomi suggested. They've been following us since San Bernardino. Possibly, Owen agreed, but they might just be hired muscle. We need to find out who's behind this. He pulled back the curtain cautiously and peered out at the darkened street below. A man stood in the shadows across from the hotel, smoking a cigarette. As Owen watched, the man glanced up at their window, then casually moved along. "We're definitely being watched," he muttered. "We need a plan." They spent hours discussing possibilities, trying to piece together the fragments of information they'd gathered. By midnight, they had a theory. William had somehow crossed someone powerful in San Francisco, someone who had engineered an elaborate scheme to punish him by destroying his reputation and ultimately taking his life. But why such a complicated plan? Naomi wondered. If they wanted William dead, why not simply kill him? Because someone wanted him to suffer first, Owen said darkly. To have his name ruined, to be blamed for murder, that suggests personal hatred, not just business. They decided to take a calculated risk. The next morning, they would openly announce their intention to return to California, as if giving up their investigation. In reality, they would continue quietly gathering information, hoping to draw out whoever was holding William. "It's dangerous," Owen warned. "Whoever has your son has already killed at least once the stagecoach driver. They won't hesitate to kill again." "I don't care about the danger," Naomi said firmly. "I only care about finding William." Owen studied her face in the lamplight. The journey had changed her. The grief-stricken mother he'd met in Riverside had been transformed into a determined woman willing to face any threat to save her son. Her courage moved him deeply, awakening feelings he'd thought long dead. "We'll find him," he promised softly. "Together." Their gazes held for a long moment. Then, with a sudden awareness of their proximity in the small hotel room, Owen cleared his throat and moved toward the door. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be challenging." "Owen," Naomi called as he reached for the doorknob. "Thank you for believing me when no one else did. For helping me find the truth." He nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Try to sleep. I'll be next door if you need anything." But sleep eluded Owen that night. He sat by his window, watching the street below, his mind working through the puzzle of William Garrett's disappearance and James Miller's death. Somewhere in the tangle of facts and suspicions lay the truth and possibly the key to finding William alive. And alongside these thoughts, unwelcome but persistent, were others concerning Naomi Garrett. He admired her strength, her unwavering faith in her son, her refusal to be intimidated. More than admired, he was drawn to her in a way he hadn't been drawn to anyone since losing his wife. The realization troubled him. Getting involved with Naomi would be a mistake. Once this was over, once William was found one way or another, he would move on, as he always did. Forming attachments only led to pain. Yet as dawn approached, Owen found himself making a silent promise. Whatever happened, he would see this through to the end. For William's sake, and for Naomi's. The next morning, they made a show of booking passage on the westbound stage for the following day. Owen loudly informed the hotel clerk that they were returning to California, having learned all they could in Silver Creek. "Mrs. Garrett is convinced her son's name was misused," he explained within earshot of several breakfast patrons. "But there's nothing more we can do here." Word spread quickly through the small town. By noon, Sheriff Hollister had sought them out to confirm their departure. "Giving up already?" he asked, clearly disappointed. "I thought we were making progress." "We've reached a dead end," Owen said with feigned resignation. "Mrs. Garrett needs to return home. This has been too difficult for her." Hollister nodded sympathetically, though Owen thought he detected relief in the sheriff's eyes. "I understand. I'll continue looking into the matter, of course. Of course, Owen agreed, not believing him for a moment. We appreciate your help, Sheriff. With their public departure announced, Owen and Naomi were free to execute the real plan. That afternoon, while Naomi remained visibly at the hotel, Owen slipped out the back and made his way to the Wells Fargo office, where he sent telegrams to the sheriff in San Francisco and to a former lawman he trusted in Yuma, asking for information about William Garrett and James Miller. He also paid a visit to the local newspaper office, where he examined back issues covering the stagecoach robbery and subsequent trial. The reports were straightforward but revealed one interesting detail. The stolen payroll had never been recovered. $5,000 is still missing, he told Naomi when he returned to the hotel. Neither Miller nor the other robbers had it when Miller was arrested. So whoever planned this not only framed an innocent man and kidnapped my son, but they also got away with a small fortune, Naomi concluded. Exactly. And that might be the key to all of this. Maybe William discovered something in San Francisco, something about a planned robbery. Instead of killing him outright, they decided to use him as part of their scheme. But why have they kept him alive? Naomi wondered. Now that the robbery is done and Miller has been hanged. Leverage, perhaps, Owen suggested, or maybe they're not done using him yet. As evening approached, Owen grew increasingly uneasy. Their ruse seemed to be working too well. No one had made any suspicious moves and the street outside the hotel remained quiet. I don't like it, he muttered, peering through the curtains for the dozenth time. They should have made a move by now, tried to follow us or contacted us again. Unless they believe we've actually given up, Naomi suggested. Maybe. But Owen's instincts told him otherwise. Something was wrong. His suspicions were confirmed when there was a sharp knock at the door. Owen motioned for Naomi to stay back as he drew his revolver and approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "Telegram for Mrs. Garrett," came the reply. Owen opened the door a crack, his gun hidden behind it. A young boy stood in the hallway, holding a yellow envelope. "Thanks, son," Owen said, taking the telegram and giving the boy a coin. He closed the door and handed the envelope to Naomi, who tore it open with trembling fingers. Her face paled as she read the message aloud. "Come alone to abandoned silver mine 2 miles north of town at midnight. If you want to see your son, stop no law or Jenkins or William dies. Stop, it's a trap," Owen said immediately. "They're trying to separate us." "I know," Naomi agreed, her voice steady despite her evident fear. "But I have to go, it's William." "We'll both go," Owen countered, "but not the way they expect." They spent the next hours planning carefully. The abandoned mine was a location Owen had heard mention, the Silver Bullet, one of the first mines to play out after the initial strike. It was in rough country north of town, isolated and dangerous. "They'll expect you to come from the main trail," Owen reasoned. "I'll approach from the ridge above, get into position before you arrive. When they show themselves, I'll be ready." "What if they have lookouts?" Naomi worried. "They might, but they're expecting a grieving mother desperate to save her son, not a coordinated effort." Owen checked his revolver and the rifle he'd acquired earlier in the day. "You'll need to be convincing. Act terrified and alone." "That won't require much acting," Naomi admitted, her attempt at humor betrayed by the tremor in her voice. Owen gently took her hands in his. "I won't let anything happen to you, or to William if he's there. You have my word." She looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I believe you." The simple statement of faith affected Owen more deeply than he expected. For so long, he'd avoided connections, responsibilities, the weight of others' trust. Yet here was Naomi Garrett, placing her life and her son's in his hands without hesitation. "We should get ready," he said, releasing her hands reluctantly. "It's a long ride to the mine, and I need to get into position before you arrive." They left the hotel separately, Owen first, slipping out through the kitchen while Naomi created a diversion in the lobby. They had arranged to meet at the livery stable, where their horses were saddled and waiting. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant in the vast Arizona sky. They rode in silence until they reached the fork where their paths would diverge, Owen to circle around and approach the mine from above, Naomi to continue on the main trail as instructed. "Midnight," Owen reminded her. "Not a minute before. I need time to get into position." Naomi nodded, her face pale in the moonlight. "Be careful. You too." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "We'll find him, Naomi. We'll bring William home." She smiled, a brief, tremulous expression that stirred something in his chest. Then she was gone, riding toward the abandoned mine and whatever awaited her there. Owen urged Sundance up the steep trail that led to the ridge overlooking the mine. The terrain was treacherous in the dark, but the moon provided enough light to navigate. He reached the summit with time to spare and tied Sundance securely in a stand of pine trees before continuing on foot. The Silver Bullet mine was clearly visible below a dark opening in the hillside, surrounded by the collapsing remains of support structures. A small cabin, presumably once the mine office, stood nearby. Moonlight gleamed on the metal tracks that led from the mine entrance to a rusted ore car. Owen found a position behind an outcropping of rocks that gave him a clear view of the area. He settled in with his rifle, watching for any sign of movement. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. At precisely midnight, he saw Naomi approaching on horseback. She rode slowly, her posture radiating the fear and uncertainty they had discussed. Owen scanned the area, looking for any sign of an ambush. There a flicker of movement near the cabin. Someone was watching from the shadows, and another figure near the mine entrance itself. How many were there? Owen adjusted his position slightly for a better angle. Naomi reached the small clearing in front of the mine and dismounted. "Hello," she called, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "I'm here. I came alone as you asked. Where's my son?" For a moment nothing happened. Then the cabin door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with a rifle cradled in his arms. Even from a distance, Owen recognized Frank Carson. "Mrs. Garrett," Carson called, "you're a brave woman coming here alone." "Where's William?" Naomi demanded, her voice stronger now. "I want to see my son." Carson gestured, and another man emerged from the mine entrance, pushing someone ahead of him, a young man with his hands bound, stumbling as he was forced forward. "William!" Naomi cried, starting toward him. "Stay where you are," Carson ordered sharply. "Not another step until we've come to an understanding." From his vantage point, Owen could see the family resemblance between Naomi and her son. William had the same determined set to his jaw, though his face was bruised and he looked exhausted. "What understanding?" Naomi asked. "I came as you demanded. Now release my son," Carson laughed. "It's not that simple, Mrs. Garrett. Your son has caused us a great deal of trouble." "I don't understand," Naomi said. "What has William done to you?" "He saw something he shouldn't have in San Francisco," Carson replied. "Recognized someone he shouldn't have recognized. Made the mistake of mentioning it." Owen adjusted his aim, focusing on Carson. From what he could tell, there were at least 3 men: Carson, the one holding William, and likely a third nearby. Not impossible odds, but he needed to be careful. William was too exposed. "I didn't know what I was seeing," William called to his mother, earning himself a rough shake from his captor. "I didn't realize until it was too late." "Shut up," the man holding him growled. Owen recognized that voice. It was one of Carson's brothers. The family resemblance was clear now that he studied them together. Three brothers running a complex scheme that involved identity theft, kidnapping, and murder. But why? Carson was speaking again. Here's how this will work, Mrs. Garrett. You and your son are going to disappear. There's a wagon waiting down the trail. It will take you to Mexico. You'll have enough money to start a new life there far away from California and Arizona. And if we refuse? Naomi asked, though she clearly already knew the answer. Carson's smile was cold. Then you'll join James Miller in Boot Hill, and so will your friend Jenkins when we find him. Owen tensed, so they knew he was involved despite their precautions. Who was James Miller? Naomi asked, clearly stalling for time. Why did he use my son's name? Miller was useful, Carson replied with a shrug. A drifter with no family, no connections, easily manipulated with promises of money, and easily disposed of when he'd served his purpose. You framed him for the robbery, Naomi realized, and made him use William's name to ruin my son's reputation. Very astute, Mrs. Garrett. Yes, Miller played his part well, though he didn't know the full script. He thought he was just helping us establish an alibi. He didn't realize he was the sacrificial lamb until it was too late. Owen had heard enough. Carson and his brothers were clearly the masterminds behind the stagecoach robbery. They'd used Miller as a patsy, forced him to use William's name, and then arranged for him to be caught and hanged while they escaped with the money. And they'd kidnapped William because he could identify them. It was time to act. Owen took careful aim at Carson, preparing to fire when a voice spoke directly behind him. I wouldn't do that, Jenkins. Owen froze, cursing himself for not considering a fourth man a lookout positioned on the ridge. He'd been so focused on the scene below that he'd missed the approaching danger. Put the rifle down, the voice continued. Nice and slow. Owen had no choice. He carefully set the rifle down and raised his hands. Turn around. Keep those hands where I can see them. Owen turned to find himself facing Pete Carson, the youngest of the brothers. The family resemblance was unmistakable, though Pete was slighter than his siblings. You're a persistent man, Jenkins, Pete said, his own rifle trained steadily on Owen's chest. Frank said you'd show up, but Ed thought the mother would come alone. Sorry to disappoint Ed, Owen replied, his mind racing for a way out of this predicament. Start walking, Pete ordered, gesturing toward a narrow path that led down to the mine. Frank will want to deal with you personally. As they descended, Owen could hear Naomi still talking, still trying to reason with Carson. She was standing strong, showing no sign of the fear she must be feeling. William, too, looked defiant despite his bonds. Pride swelled in Owen's chest. They were both so brave, so determined. He couldn't let them down now. Look what I found, Frank, Pete called as they reached the clearing. A would-be rescuer. Carson turned, his expression changing to one of satisfaction when he saw Owen. Jenkins, I had a feeling you wouldn't let Mrs. Garrett come alone. Commendable loyalty, but foolish. Naomi's eyes met Owen's, her dismay evident. I'm sorry, she mouthed silently. He gave a slight shake of his head. This wasn't over yet. So now what, Carson? Owen asked, keeping his tone casual. You kill all three of us. That's a lot of bodies to explain. People know we came to Silver Creek asking questions. People know you left on the morning stage, Carson countered. Or at least they'll think you did when 3 passengers matching your descriptions boarded. After that, who knows what became of you? The West is a dangerous place. It was a solid plan, Owen had to admit. The Carson brothers had thought of everything. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for: Owen's message to his friend in Yuma. If anything happened to them, there would be questions. Before you pull that trigger, Owen said, nodding at the revolver in Carson's hand, you might want to know that I sent telegrams to law enforcement in 3 territories this morning, detailing everything we've learned about your operation. Carson's expression flickered. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Why take the chance? You've got the money from the robbery. You can disappear with it, start fresh somewhere else. No need to add 3 more murders to your tally." For a moment, Owen thought the gambit might work. Carson hesitated, clearly weighing his options. But then his expression hardened. "Nice try, Jenkins, but we can't leave witnesses, not after all this effort." He raised his revolver, aiming directly at Owen's heart. Several things happened at once. William suddenly drove his shoulder into the stomach of the brother holding him, sending them both crashing to the ground. Naomi screamed and lunged toward them. And Owen, seizing the moment of distraction, drove his elbow into Pete Carson's solar plexus. Pete doubled over, gasping, and Owen wrenched the rifle from his hands. A shot rang out, Frank Carson firing wildly as chaos erupted. Owen took aim and fired in one smooth motion. Carson staggered, clutching his shoulder, his gun falling to the dirt. "Don't move," Owen shouted, swinging the rifle toward Ed Carson, who was struggling with William on the ground. But Ed had managed to draw a knife, which he now held to William's throat. "Drop the rifle, Jenkins, or the boy dies right now." Owen froze, the rifle half raised. Ed was using William as a shield, making a clean shot impossible. "Let him go, Carson," Owen said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "It's over. Frank's wounded, Pete's down. You can't win this." "Watch me," Ed snarled, dragging William to his feet, the knife still pressed to his throat. "I'm walking out of here. Anyone tries to stop me, I'll cut him ear to ear." Naomi stood paralyzed, her eyes fixed on her son. "Please," she whispered, "please don't hurt him." "Shut up," Ed shouted, his voice cracking with stress. He began backing toward the trail, dragging William with him. "Frank, Pete, get up. We're leaving." Frank struggled to his feet, his left shoulder bleeding freely. Pete remained curled on the ground, still fighting for breath after Owen's blow to his midsection. "It won't work, Ed," Owen said calmly, keeping the rifle trained on them. "You can't get far with a hostage and a wounded man. Let William go, and maybe you can make it to Mexico before the law catches up with you." "Listen to him, Ed," Frank gasped, pressing a hand to his wounded shoulder. "This has gone too far." "Gone too far," Ed repeated incredulously. "It went too far when we robbed that stage. It went too far when we framed Miller and had him hanged. There's no going back now." While Ed was focused on his brother, William made his move. He drove his head backward, connecting with Ed's nose. The man howled in pain, his grip on the knife loosening just enough for William to twist free. Owen didn't hesitate. He fired, the rifle shot echoing off the canyon walls. Ed Carson collapsed, a crimson stain spreading across his chest. "William." Naomi rushed forward as her son staggered away from his fallen captor. She caught him in her arms, holding him tightly as if afraid he might disappear again. Owen kept the rifle aimed at Frank, who had sunk to his knees, his face ashen from blood loss. Pete was slowly recovering, but he made no move toward the weapons lying in the dirt. "It's over, Carson," Owen said quietly. Frank nodded, a strange smile crossing his face. "Looks like it, but you'll never find the money." "I don't care about the money," Owen replied. "Only about justice for James Miller and the stagecoach driver you murdered, and for what you put the Garretts through." As Naomi helped William remove his bonds, Owen gathered the discarded weapons and kept a close eye on the surviving Carson brothers. Frank's wound wasn't life-threatening, but he'd need medical attention soon. Pete seemed to have given up completely, sitting silent and defeated beside his brother. William, once freed, approached Owen with his hand extended. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm William Garrett. I understand I owe you my life." Owen shook the young man's hand, struck by his composure after such an ordeal. "Your mother's the one who never gave up. She knew you were innocent from the start." William turned to Naomi, his expression softening. "I'm sorry, Mother. I never meant to put you through this." "What happened, William?" she asked. "How did you get involved with these men?" William sighed. "I was working on the docks in San Francisco, just as I wrote you. One day, I saw Frank Carson meeting with a man I recognized, a bank manager from Sacramento who'd been in the news for embezzling funds. I was foolish enough to mention it to a coworker. Turned out he was connected to the Carsons. They couldn't let you identify the bank manager," Owen surmised. "He was probably their contact for laundering the stolen payroll." William nodded. "They grabbed me off the street that night. Kept me prisoner while they planned the stagecoach robbery. I overheard them talking about using my identity for something, but I never imagined." His voice trailed off. "They used a drifter named James Miller," Owen explained. "Made him pose as you, then framed him for the robbery. He was hanged for murder while they got away with the money. And they kept you alive as insurance," Naomi added, her arm around her son's waist, "in case something went wrong." "They were planning to kill me once they were sure they'd escaped clean," William confirmed. "If you hadn't found me." The implications hung in the air. If Naomi hadn't trusted her instincts, if Owen hadn't helped her, if they hadn't pursued the truth so relentlessly, William would be dead, and his name would be forever tarnished by crimes he hadn't committed. "We need to get back to town," Owen said, breaking the somber mood. "Sheriff Hollister needs to hear the full story, and Frank needs a doctor." Using horses from the Carson brothers' camp, they fashioned a travois for the wounded Frank and the body of Ed. Pete was bound and placed on his own horse. The grim procession made its way back to Silver Creek as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky. Sheriff Hollister was astonished when they arrived, his disbelief turning to shock as Owen and the Garretts explained everything that had happened. The truth about the stagecoach robbery, James Miller's false identity, William's kidnapping, it all came out as Frank and Pete Carson were locked in cells to await trial. "I can't believe it," Hollister kept saying. "A scheme this elaborate, right under my nose." "They planned carefully," Owen pointed out. "They needed someone to hang for the crime, to close the case while they escaped with the money. And they needed a name with no local connections," William added. "So when people went looking for William Garrett after the hanging, they'd find no trace of him in Silver Creek. What they didn't count on," Naomi said, "was a mother who knew her son could never commit such crimes." Hollister had the grace to look ashamed. "I should have asked more questions. Verified the man's identity more thoroughly." "We all make mistakes," Owen said, thinking of his own past errors in judgment. "What matters is making them right when we can." In the days that followed, a full investigation was launched. Telegrams were sent to San Francisco and Sacramento. The bank manager William had recognized was arrested. James Miller's body was exhumed from its grave in Boot Hill and given a proper burial under his real name. The stolen payroll was never recovered. Frank Carson refused to reveal its location, preferring to keep that final card in his hand as he faced the gallows. But Owen didn't care about the money. What mattered was that William Garrett was alive and his name was cleared. A week after the confrontation at the Silver Bullet mine, Owen and the Garretts prepared to return to California. William had recovered remarkably well from his ordeal, though nightmares plagued his sleep. Naomi had blossomed with her son's return, the lines of worry easing from her face. And Owen found himself facing a decision he hadn't anticipated. "Will you come back to Riverside with us?" Naomi asked the night before their departure. They were sitting on the hotel's veranda, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson. Owen hesitated. The question touched on feelings he'd been avoiding since they'd rescued William. feelings for Naomi that had grown stronger with each day they'd spent together. "I'm not much for settling down," he said finally. "I've been drifting too long." Naomi studied him, her green eyes seeing too much. "Because it's safer not to care, not to form attachments," he looked away. "Something like that." "Owen," she said softly, using his given name with a tenderness that made his chest ache. "When Thomas died, I thought I'd never feel anything again except grief. I built walls around my heart to protect myself. William was the only one I let inside those walls." Owen understood perfectly. He'd done the same after losing his family. "But then you came into my life," Naomi continued, "a stranger who stopped to help when everyone else just stared. Who believed me when even I was starting to doubt myself. Who risked his life to save my son." "I was just doing what needed to be done," Owen muttered uncomfortably. "No, you were doing what most men wouldn't have done. You could have walked away at any point. You didn't." She touched his hand gently. "Those walls I built, they're not there anymore. You broke through them without even trying." Owen's throat tightened with emotion he couldn't express. "Naomi, I'm not asking for promises," she interrupted. "I'm just asking you to consider that perhaps there's more to life than drifting. That maybe, just maybe, there's room in your heart for something besides memories." Before he could respond, William appeared in the doorway. "Mother, the stage office just confirmed our tickets for tomorrow." Naomi squeezed Owen's hand once, then rose. "Thank you, William. I'll be right there." As she walked away, Owen remained on the veranda, his thoughts in turmoil. Naomi's words had struck a chord deep within him. For 7 years, he'd been running from memories, from connections, from the possibility of loss. It had seemed safer that way, simpler. But watching Naomi with her son, seeing the joy on her face despite everything they'd endured, Owen found himself questioning the path he'd chosen. Was safety worth the emptiness? Was avoiding loss worth never experiencing love again? The next morning, he stood with the Garretts as the westbound stage was loaded. Their bags were stowed and passengers were beginning to board. "I guess this is goodbye," William said, extending his hand. "I can never thank you enough, Mr. Jenkins." Owen shook the young man's hand firmly. "Take care of your mother, she's quite a woman." "I know," William agreed with a smile. "The strongest person I've ever known." He boarded the stage, leaving Owen and Naomi alone for a moment. "So," she said softly, "have you decided?" Owen looked at her, really looked at her. The morning sun highlighted the silver in her dark hair, the fine lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and tears. She had faced her worst fears and emerged stronger. She had never given up, never stopped believing, and somehow along the way she had awakened something in him that he'd thought was dead and buried in Texas. "I've decided," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "that I've been running long enough." Joy bloomed in Naomi's eyes. "Does that mean you're coming to Riverside?" Owen nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders as he made the choice. "I'm coming home with you if you'll have me." "I'll have you," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "We both will." As they boarded the stage together, William grinned at the sight of their clasped hands. The driver called out, and the stage lurched into motion, carrying them west toward Riverside, toward home, toward a future none of them could have imagined when their paths first crossed. 2 months later, Owen stood on the porch of Naomi's house in Riverside, watching the sunset. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of color against the weathered wood of the fence. Inside, he could hear Naomi and William preparing dinner, their voices raised in cheerful conversation. So much had changed since that fateful day when he'd heard Naomi's scream in the street. The woman whose grief had touched something in his long, dormant heart was now his wife. They had married in a small ceremony 3 weeks after returning from Silver Creek, with William standing proudly as witness. The millinery shop was thriving under Naomi's renewed energy. William had taken a position with the railroad, his harrowing experience having given him a new appreciation for stability and home. And Owen had found work as a deputy to Riverside's aging sheriff, his experience as a lawman making him a natural choice. For the first time in 7 years, Owen had stopped running. He had allowed himself to care, to form attachments, to build a life with people who mattered to him. The fear of loss was still there, it probably always would be, but it no longer controlled him. "Dinner's ready," Naomi called from the doorway. She came to stand beside him, slipping her arm through his. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" Owen smiled down at her. "About how lucky I am, how close I came to riding out of Riverside and missing all of this." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "We were both fortunate. In the midst of all that tragedy and danger, we found each other. We found peace," Owen said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken to her on that first day when her world had been shattered by a telegram. "Despite everything, we found peace." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Owen Jenkins held his wife close and gave silent thanks for the scream that had stopped him in the street of a dusty California town. For the courage of a mother who refused to believe her son was capable of murder. For the chain of events that had led him, at last, to home. The past could not be changed, the losses, the mistakes, the regrets would always be part of him. But the future stretched before them now, bright with possibility and rich with love. And that, Owen realized, was more than enough.